It is my pleasure to be here. I met Yuri last year, and there's a deep hunger in him to not just be a pastor and a leader, but to really make a difference in people, and he's a learner. And so if this is your first time here, or maybe you've been here from the beginning, or maybe you came from another campus, I want you to know that what you have in a leader here is somebody who walks in humility. And the conversations we have tells me that when somebody is a learner, it tells you that they have not settled, that they don't have all of the answers, and that they are seeking out truth. And sometimes when you seek out truth, there's correction, there's things you're doing wrong, there's things you want to do better, and that is the kind of leader you want to have, all right? And so I appreciate your heart and how you lead. So I'm married to a beautiful woman named Elizabeth. We call her Libby. We have 5 children. Yeah, that's a lot. We are not Mormon or anything like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have Mormon friends, but that's the number one question we get. Is it part of your religion? You have to have a lot of kids? And we just don't believe in televisions, and so we just have children. So we have a kid in every age of life. We have our oldest son is in college. Our second kid's in high school. We have a child in middle school, a child in elementary school, and a child in preschool, and we nap during the day while they're gone because they're crazy, but they're our gift to us. And I, as you're in this series about thriving in Babylon, and if this is your first time here, that's what we're talking about. How do you thrive in a place that many considered exile? Many consider a culture that maybe I don't fit in. And what I want to say about that is we all have seasons that we don't like. We all have places that we don't like. Many of us in this room are here because our family did not like the place they lived. They didn't like the marginalization. Maybe they didn't like the regime they were under. Maybe they didn't like, and so they came and did what they could do so that we could have better lives. And there's a respect that I have for that, but every person has seasons. Every person goes through things. Every person has a place they don't like. I've lived in multiple places, and there are a couple of them I don't want to go back to for any reason. Because there's just something about it that didn't settle with me. But as we talk about Babylon and what does Babylon mean, a lot of times we think of Babylon as just an evil place to be. And we don't allow ourselves to really embrace the season that we're in. And what happens is we have to understand either God is with us or he's not. And if God is with us, that means he's with us in every season, in every city, and every circumstance, in every situation. And because some of us have been through some very awful things, and some of us have endured certain things of life, we can think, well, God was not with me in that season. God abandoned me. But the truth is, when we look back on that season, we can see how God was still with us, even though there were things that we didn't like and circumstances that hurt us and situations. It does not mean that God abandoned us. What it means is our job is to submit to that season. Say, God, what do you want to do in me during this season? And maybe you're in the room and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about because I don't even know if I believe in God. Guess what? That's okay. That's a good place to be. But the fact is you have found yourself here. And you're on some journey of faith. And here's what I want to tell you. Whether you've been a believer of God for decades or you're still not a believer yet, I want you to know something, that everybody is actually on a faith journey. And even if you have come to know God, Paul tells us to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. That means we never settle into a place. We should all be moving. And as we move, there's highs. And as we move, there are lows, but we continue to move. So if you're not quite a believer yet, but you're on a faith journey, you're in a great place. We're glad that you are here. My wife and I are pastors, and so we've moved, and we've been on assignment with different places and helping churches because we believe in the local church. But it hasn't always been the most exciting time. And that's what we find when we go to Jeremiah 29. So I want you to, if you have your Bibles or you're taking notes, go to Jeremiah 29. And what you have here, give you some context of the story, and then we're going to read, is you have the people of Israel. They're Jewish people. They're from Israel. They're from Jerusalem. That's the home city, the home base. And they have been taken as slaves. They've been taken as slaves into Babylon. They've been taken away from the city. And what you find is nobody really wants to be in slavery. I mean, some of you might feel that way because of your job. Right? You want to keep the job. It's a good job. You're on a professional track. And they tell you, hey, we're going to move you to this city for a year. Well, I really don't want to do that, but it's part of the professional development of your job. So you do that so we can have a mindset of slavery. And that's where the Israelites are. They're thinking of themselves as, we just can't wait to get back home. I mean, how many of you have parents that always talk about where they came from? And sometimes as a teenager, you're like, well, go back. Right? It was so great. Oh, yeah. That's why you did everything you did to get here, because it was awful. I mean, it was so awesome. No, it was awful. You didn't like it. And that's where the Israelites are. They're like, oh, they're wanting the prophets to prophesy false things. They're asking spiritual leaders to tell them and to tickle their ears about how they're going to go back home and God's going to deliver them. And it's going to be fine. Yeah, it was just a season of being here in captivity and in Babylon. And so for them, Babylon wasn't a city. Babylon was slavery. And so when we think of Babylon as modern day believers or modern day people who are on a journey of faith, we can't say necessarily that the city we live in is Babylon. We have to have the mentality of it's just a city. Babylon is what I make of it. Babylon is what I allow the culture to do to me, as opposed to why am I there and what difference can I make in the culture. And if we're not careful, we become victims. And when we become victims, we become isolated. And when we become isolated, we make mistakes we would never make. And then we make mistakes we never make, and then we have shame. And then we have shame, and we remove ourselves from relationships. We remove ourselves from a God who loves us, all because of disposition, mindset, and our heart. So here's what's happening. The Israelites are complaining, and they're wanting the prophets to tell them they're going back home, and God intervenes. He literally shows up to his people and he corrects them. But not to correct them, not to hurt them, but to encourage them for the future. So here we go. Jeremiah 29, we're going to read a few verses together. I know some of you, this will be your reading for the day because you don't read more than like 2 sentences, right? Because we watch videos all day long. So here we go. More reading, 4 through 14. Here it says, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Here's what he says. You're in slavery. You're in a place you don't want to live. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to build houses and settle down. No, I just want to rent because I don't want to buy a house here. It's too expensive. I don't have plans for being here very long. I don't plan on being in this job very long, so I'm just gonna work here till I find the next one. And God's like, no. I want you to build houses and settle down. I want you to plant gardens and eat what they produce. What does that mean? If you're gonna plant a garden and eat what they produce, that means you have to carry out the whole growth season. God didn't say, I want you to plant it and then leave and somebody else will harvest it. No, I want you to plant it, and then I want you to stay long enough to eat the fruit of what you planted. What does that mean? Time. Settle down, build houses, give time, marry, and have sons and daughters. And you're like, yes. And practice over and over again, right? So it's funny because my daughter came home the other day. She's like, Dad, I was so anxious. And she really does deal with anxiety. So we sat down and talked to her. I said, well, what's causing? What's the pressure point? What's going on? I don't want to have children. I was like, oh, girl, you're going to have kids because I'm going to be a granddad, right? But I didn't say that. I was like, okay, sweetheart, well, why don't you want to have children? The earth is dying. And I can't bring children into this world. She was being so serious. And do you know that's a real anxiety for the next generation coming up? I don't understand it. Because I'm like, they told us 100 years? My kids will live and die before then, right? So let's have kids. I come from a different generation, but she was very serious. And I was like, you know what, sweetheart? Just take a deep breath. It's going to be fine. And I walked her through how God is the one who's our source. God is our protector. We live under his rules. So marry, have sons and daughters, even though you don't like the world you currently live in. Find wives for your sons so they can finally leave your house. And give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Is that what you want to hear when you're in a city you don't want to live in? Is that what you want to hear when you're in a season that you're just trying to get through? God's saying, settle down. Buckle up. This is where you're going to be for a little bit. But then he says this, also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. So if we make the city we live in the enemy and the culture we're in the enemy, we will no longer be a blessing to them. And God says, don't look at them as the enemy. Look at you as a light, as Pastor was saying. And if you don't see yourself as a light into darkness, you'll keep your light to yourself. Seek the prosperity of your city. Pray to the Lord for it. Because if it prospers, if the city prospers, if your business, if your boss prospers, and some of you are like, I don't want my boss to do well. He's going to take all the credit. But if your boss prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them. So when somebody says, the season's about to be over and the blessing of God is coming. Well, if God put you in that season and you haven't learned the lessons you want to learn, that's a lie. I know we want to hear it, but it's not the truth. It's like saying, gosh, I'm done with college. And somebody says, you know what? I just had a dream from the Lord. I feel like your university is going to call you, and they're just going to hand you a diploma. When has that ever happened? You have to put the time in. You have to earn the right to say, I'm a professional in this field. And God is saying, God does not cut corners. And you know what the rest of the world and people who aren't believers think? They believe that we think we have a right to have an easy road. And that we are better than unbelievers. God looks at you and is like, I'm no respecter of persons. You have to work. You have to go through a process. There are no shortcuts. But listen to this. The Lord says, and when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you. What did he say? How many years? 70. What if God told you you were going to be in your current situation for 70 years? Some of you are like, close my Bible, I'm walking out right now. Forget it. You know what the problem is in our culture? That our parents, almost everybody in here, unless you are a Native American, had a family who had a dream for what their family could look like. And we came from people who didn't overvalue their lives. They valued the next generation. Want to know why? As Americans, if you are now here, you're considered an American because you get all the perks of being American. We overvalue the short term and undervalue the long term. And God is a long-term God. He's thinking of your kids and your grandkids, and all we can think about is us. We want to plant the harvest, and then we want to eat the harvest. And God's like, yeah, you can do that, but what about the next generation? There are people in Israel who were older who heard that 70 years, and they knew in that moment they would never go back home. My grandmother is from the Caribbean, and the hurricane just knocked over her house, and she had to come over to the mainland and live in Texas with my dad. And all she talked about was going back. I mean, that's all she talked about. She would call me, tell your dad to send me back. I'm like, Grandma, you don't have a house. I'll go live on the street. That's better to live on that island than this godforsaken country. I'm like, really? Like, you sacrificed for all your kids to go to college so they could have the life in this country. And you know what we did? We put money together. We got her house done. She's like, I'm going back. She's 90 years old. And she went back. Because she couldn't stand the fact of walking through this process. And I love my grandmother. I'm not talking bad about her. I'm very respectful of her. I call her all the time. My grandmother's awesome. She's about 5'10". She's dark. She's black. I love her. She's got 2 teeth. She's awesome. She's real thin. She walks everywhere. But she had an opportunity to actually be with her sons and her daughters and her grandkids for the rest of her life. And she didn't have the vision for it. So she went back to an island where nobody is. Because it's human nature. We value the short term and what pleases us. 70 years are completed for Babylon. I will come to you and fulfill my good promises to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you. We love that part of the verse. God, I know that you have plans for me. And they're going to be so good. But we don't actually read the whole passage. They are going to be good. But you may never get to see them. They may be good for other people. And that's what's hard when you read passages like this, because God is a good God, but it doesn't mean we don't face adversity. And it doesn't mean we don't face adversity for a very long time, and that we have to endure. And there are things that some of us have been through, and I know I'm kind of joking a little bit, but there are some things that some of us have been through that may never leave us, and we want them to be gone. Chances are, in this room alone, there's multiple people who have been through things that you won't ever want anybody to go through. I was sexually abused as a kid when I was 8 years old by friends of my parents. 3 years. God awful. And I look back on that season, I'm like, how? Like, I don't understand. But when I, enduring that and giving it to God, I gave my life to Christ when I was a sophomore in college. And I didn't understand why I went through what I went through. I remember I was a junior in college, and God asked me to share my story with like a group of teenagers. It was like 150 teenagers. I had never told anybody but my parents at that point. I'm like, this is stupid. This was like the mid-90s. Nobody really talked about abuse. It wasn't like there's no safe space. And so I did. And after the service, I'm a volunteer. I'm not a pastor. And there was a line of kids who wanted to talk to me. At least 15, 20 kids who had the same exact story. And I could have sat back and said, God, why me? But in that moment, I understood why me. Because somebody needed somebody else to bring hope and a future and a way out. In that line alone were 3 girls that we had to report to police on family members. And at that point, because of that night, because it wasn't my idea, who wants to stand up and say, hey, look what happened to me? But I was obedient, and 3 girls no longer lived in that kind of slavery in their house anymore. That's what God calls us to when we go to Babylon, to bring freedom to the captives. But how can we bring freedom to the captives? We have a mindset of captivity. We can't really be used. And then God, He's so good. He's so crazy. He says this, then you call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. All of your heart. And I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have abandoned you. Listen to that. All the nations. He's talking to Babylonia, but he says all the nations. What does that mean? It means the diaspora of the Jews was more than just Babylon. What does that mean? It means I'm not the only one going through this. There are other people going through this. And sometimes we look at our situation like we have the worst situation in the whole world. And we talk about it, people look at us like, really? That's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? Come on. There are more people suffering and more people going through these. And once you're faithful and you come before me, I will gather all of you from all of the nations where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place for which I carried you into exile. There's a purpose. What are the 3 things we learn? And then we're going to pray and we're going to go on with our day. Number 1, live like there is a tomorrow. Stop pushing pause on your life. Stop pushing pause. Stop saying, you know what? I'm not going to get married until I'm financially ready. Good luck. I'm not going to have kids until we're financially ready. You never have enough. I'm not going to do this. God's like, wait a minute. Why don't you ask me what you should do? And when I tell you to do something, just go do it and trust that I'm with you. Live like there's a tomorrow. Teach your children to wait upon the Lord. What if we had a generation who taught the kids to be patient and wait? And I know it's countercultural. It's not what Babylon teaches us. But what if we had a generation of people who could wait upon the Lord, even if it took 70 years? Build houses, plant gardens, marry and have children, have grandchildren, increase, do not decrease, even though you don't like the season you're in. Don't be less than, be all that God has asked you to be. Live like there's a tomorrow. Number 2, be community minded. Pastor already said it. Be a light. Serve the people. Is this the only place you serve if you come to church here? Or are you known in your community? Are you known in your apartment complex? Are you known down your street? If you're not known, you're no good. You're no good to the kingdom of light if you don't actually bring your light. And I know I was warned when I moved to Seattle a few years ago. Seattle's so different. People are against God. I'm like, okay, well, this is where God told me to be. I'm going to be myself. You know how many people I was able to talk to about Jesus? You know how many times I got turned down talking about the gospel? You know how many times I got turned down talking about the gospel here in the city? Not like I'm talking about, oh, we don't want to hear this from you. 0. Not because I'm a good orator. You want to know why? Because I treated people like people. Why? Because I had to remind myself that I'm just a person. I'm not a saint. I'm a person. I'm a person who deals with sin and issues. And I have kids. And I have a mortgage. And I have the things like everybody else. I'm with you. I'm here in Babylon. It is what it is. How can I be like Christ? How can I serve people? My second week here, I was in an Uber with this Muslim guy, and we're talking, and he's dropping me off at our church because I hadn't bought a car yet, and he drops me off at the parking lot, and he's like, what are you doing at this church? I said, well, I'm a pastor here. He's like, and he cussed, right? He's like, what? What the blank? You're a pastor? I've been talking to you for 20 minutes. I never would have guessed you were a pastor. I said, thank you. And he pulled the car over. I mean, this is a big dude, right? Big dude. And he turned around in his seat, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, is this guy going to kill me now, right? Because and he looks at me and he goes, I'm going to church with you. I was like, okay, man, okay. I didn't even invite you, but fine. I'm going to church with you. He goes, let me tell you something. This is a dark world. It's getting kind of freaky. This is the dark world. But you are a light. Okay, man. Came to church the next weekend. I wish I had told you gave life to Christ. He didn't. But the person who's supposed to be opposed to Christ the most and opposed to the ideas of Christ was open because somebody was just normal with him and not trying to reject him. What could God do with a group like this who served the people around us? Right? So, number 1, live like there's a tomorrow. Number 2, be community-minded. And then number 3, hold on real quick before I move on. I know most of you are here because of companies and you have trying to go up the ladder, all that kind of stuff. But I guarantee, go into work this next week with a smile. I don't care if it's cloudy outside. Smile. Love people. They're going to think you're the weirdest person around. I'm a hugger. I went around this city just hugging people. You know what started happening at our church? I'd have guys come up to me and hug me without me even knowing they're there. And they would just come behind me and hug me. And their wives were like, what is going on? They just weren't expecting. Like, my husband doesn't touch anybody, but he hugs you. Do you know people want to be loved? And they put all the vibes out to keep you away, and we let them push us away. Ask somebody to lunch and pay for it. Serve people. Be a light in your business and watch what's going to happen with you. Just watch. And the last thing is this, number 3, the promise is coming. God will bring you back to Jerusalem. Sometimes through you, but sometimes through your offspring. Sometimes through your labor, but sometimes through a harvest that you labored, that somebody else got to bring in. God will do it. Maybe not on our time. He said, I will bring you back to Jerusalem. God has you in mind. And after exile, great things will happen. Some of us are the products of decades of somebody else's sacrifice. That does not excuse us from sacrificing. Because if we eat the seeds that somebody else had from the harvest, there is no harvest for your children and your children's children. I want you to write this down. I think it might be on the screen. The seeds you plant in exile become the fruit that sustains you in the promised land. It's counterintuitive. But we're not talking about earthly soil. We're talking about spiritual, godly soil. The seeds you plant in God's soil become the fruit and the harvest that sustain you in the promised land. I told you about my 5 kids and my last son, Max. He's 4 years old. And there was a season of our ministry where my wife and I were youth pastors. And from the outside, everybody loved what we were doing. We had like 800 kids, thousands of parents. We had 200 youth leaders, just crazy. Like I was traveling and speaking, all this stuff. But I hated my church. The pastor and I just did not get along. And I don't know why. We just didn't. We tried to work it out. But both of our ministries were growing. The church was growing to like 4,000 people. The youth ministry grew. So it was healthy, but we did not have good chemistry. And sometimes that happens. I could not wait to get out of there. So we transitioned the ministry. I raised up some pastors and some leaders, and they kept running with it, and then we moved on. And years later, my wife and I had 4 kids, and we were done having kids. And we got a call from a student who used to be in that student ministry, the one I didn't really want to be a part of. And she called us and she said, Pastor Carlson, Libby, I'm pregnant. I'm a senior in high school, and I don't know what to do. And I feel like everybody around me is just being very judgmental. I don't have a place to go. I want to love God. I want to be in the church. But, some of the greatest fears that people have about the church being rejected, she was feeling. And I said, what are you going to do? She goes, well, I think I'm going to have an abortion. What do you feel about that? And I said, well, here's the deal. We're going to love you no matter what. However, you know where we stand on life, right? But if that's what you choose, we're going to support you. We're going to love you. Let me give you an out, though. If you'll carry the baby to term, Libby and I are going to adopt the baby. And she was like, okay. She thought about it for a couple months, and she went in for the abortion, and then she ended up leaving. And she was like, I can't do this. And so she had the baby. We adopted him at 3 days old. Here's the deal. The seeds we planted as youth pastors in a season we didn't like, we had a harvest of years later in our son. We have an open adoption. It's the first time we're meeting, and it's Aurora his birth mom, and her mom are there. And I'm telling you, I have never cried like this before. It's our first meeting, and she's seen him for the first time after 3 or 4 months. And her mom's there, and she looks at me while my wife and the birth mom are watching Max. He's a baby. And the mom looks at me and says, Pastor Carlos, we love you. Do you know when Aurora was a teenager, she always wanted you to be her dad? And now you get to be the dad to her child. And I'm like, trying to hold it together. Right? And when you hold it together, it's uglier. You know what I'm saying? When you hold it together, it's like, ooh, and people are like, what's wrong with your face, right? Did you take a tranquilizer or something? And so I'm just blubbering. And then when I get it all together, she adds another one. She says, do you know that I gave my life to Christ? So my dad's a pastor. She goes, I gave my life to Christ when your dad was preaching. And now my grandson gets to have your dad as his grandfather. And I'm like, oh, Lord. Do you see what I'm talking about? Seeds? If we're in a season we don't like, we don't plant seeds because we don't plan on being long enough to harvest it. But if we plant seeds in seasons we don't enjoy in Babylon, we may not thrive in Babylon. But in God's timing and God's justice, there will be a season where you will harvest those seeds. And if you don't, your children will. Your community will. God wants to use you to make a difference. He wants you to thrive right where you are, and when you leave where you are and get to a promised land. But it starts with where we are right now. Will you bow your heads and close your eyes? God, we thank you for your goodness. Even when we're not good, thank you for your faithfulness when we are unfaithful. Thank you for caring about all of our seasons, even the ones that we don't Instagram about, the ones we don't share on social media or with family. It's in those seasons you're actually with us the most because you're asking us to be faithful. Those of us in the room who are in a season where we don't even believe this church stuff, but we keep finding ourselves enticed by something that's happening. God, you're so with us. With every head bowed and every eye closed, if you're in this room and you're like, that's me. I'm here, I come to church, or I came to church, and there's something intriguing about it, but gosh, all the things I hear and see and have experienced, and God, I don't know if I really want to be a part of that, but there's something spiritual I'm looking for. I'm telling you, what you're looking for is in the person of Jesus. He came and lived a sinless life, not to have this perfect church and perfect body. He came for us to actually be redeemed from our life, our mistakes, our sin. And if you're in this room with every head bowed and every eye closed, and you'd say, man, I really want to take my first step in God. I don't know what that means. I don't know what the end game is. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I'm new to the whole thing, but I'm willing to acknowledge that I need God. And I need to take a step where I begin to turn from what I'm doing and go in a direction that maybe God has for me. If you would acknowledge that you're in that place and you want to take your first step, not your 100th step, your first step, and maybe discovering who Jesus is, will you just raise your hand right where you are? Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Awesome. You can put it back down. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for your honesty. God, I pray for those who raise their hands. God, there's resources and there's things out in the lobby for them, but God, today I ask that your Spirit would be with them in a very real and tangible way, that you're with them. And for the rest of my friends, in whatever season we're in, good seasons and hard seasons, help us to be present in that season, because that's where you are. And if we fast forward, that's not where you are. You are where you are in the present. Help us to thrive in Babylon. So not just for us, but for those around us. And that those around us would have an opportunity to know who you are because of the current sacrifices we are willing to make as your sons and daughters. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.